Good evening. If you were to drive by our house a year ago, I think you'd have seen what we saw. The picture of stability. The grass was always cut. The porch light was always on, and inside looked the part too. We had the family photos on the wall, the worn-in sofa, the quiet hum of a life being lived. From the outside, we were the definition of fine. We were, I truly believed, a good family. But, it's funny the lies you tell yourself to get through the day. My biggest lie was that silence was a good thing. I'd come home from a long day, and my wife might be puttering in the kitchen, and I'd notice the quiet. "Kyle's upstairs," she'd say, and I'd just nod, maybe feel a little proud. "He's studying," I'd think. "He's responsible." I mistook his absence for independence. I thought his closed door was a sign of a young man finding his way, not a barrier he was putting up between us and a pain we couldn't see. My wife, she has this intuition I never had. She'd feel the quality of the silence. It wasn't peaceful, it was thick. Heavy. She'd say to me, "Talk to him. Just go up and see how he is." And I didn't want to. Or maybe I was afraid of what I'd find. So I'd armor myself with practicality. "He's fine," I'd tell her. "He's a teenager. They're moody. He needs to learn to push through it." That was my answer for everything. Push through, toughen up. The world isn't going to coddle you. I thought I was building resilience. I thought I was preparing him for a tough world. I had no idea that the world he was living in inside his own head was already infinitely tougher than anything I had ever faced. I built a story where his struggles were a matter of willpower. The slipping grade in chemistry? He wasn't applying himself. The way he dropped out of band, the one thing he used to love. A lack of commitment. The way he'd sometimes look at me across the dinner table, his eyes just empty. I told myself he was being disrespectful, that he was bored with his old man. I took it all personally. I saw his pain as a critique of the life I'd built for him. I was so busy looking for a problem I could solve with a lecture or a punishment that I was completely blind to the sun I was losing right in front of me. We were a family on a fault line. And every time I dismissed his mother's concern, every time I told him to man up, every time I chose being right over being connected, I was driving the tectonic plates further apart. We were so busy holding the perfect family portrait steady for the world to see. We never noticed the boy in the picture was fading right out of it. That perfect picture was a lie, and the biggest crack was my refusal to see it. It's strange the things that become monuments in your life. For us, it wasn't a car crash or a natural disaster. It was a report card. It had to be a report card, right? The ultimate measure of effort, or at least that's what I'd always believed. I remember holding that piece of paper in my hand, the F in physics staring back at me like a personal insult. All I could see was the failure. I didn't see my son standing in front of me pale, his shoulders already slumped in anticipation. I just saw the grade. And I saw it as a direct reflection of my own failure as a father. So I started in. I didn't yell at first. It was worse. It was this cold, calculated dissection of his character. "What is this, Kyle?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Explain this to me. Is this a joke?" He tried to mutter something about not understanding the material, about it being too hard, and that just lit the fuse. "Too hard," I said, my voice rising now. "Life is hard. Do you think things are just handed to you? Do you think I work all day for fun?" I took a step toward him and I could see him shrink. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. All the frustration, the worry I refused to acknowledge, it all curdled into this pure, toxic blame. "This isn't about physics," I spat at him. "This is about you. This is about laziness. This is about you not caring. You are throwing your future away, and you're embarrassing this family while you do it." The word embarrassing hung in the air. I saw his face just shut down. The last flicker of light in his eyes went out. It was like watching a door slam shut and lock from the inside. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just looked at me with this hollow, empty expression, turned around and walked upstairs. And I felt righteous. I felt like I'd done my job. I'd laid down the law. I'd confronted the problem head on. I stood there in the living room, listening to his door close, not with a slam, but with a soft, final click. And I actually remember thinking, "Good. Maybe that will finally get through to him. I had no idea that the words I just hurled at him like weapons weren't landing on a stubborn teenager, but on a young man who was already clinging to the edge of a cliff by his fingernails. I wasn't giving him a motivational speech. I was prying his fingers loose, one cruel word at a time. That night, I went to sleep thinking I'd taught my son a lesson about responsibility. I had no idea I'd just handed him a verdict. For about an hour, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a victory when you're angry. I thought I'd made my point. I thought maybe he was up there finally, hitting the books. My wife tried to talk to me, her face tight with a fear I was too stubborn to recognize. "You were too hard on him," she whispered, and I just shook my head. "Someone has to be," I said. "He needs to understand how the real world works." But the real world was happening right upstairs, and I was oblivious to it. The silence started to change. It wasn't a thinking silence anymore. It was a dead silence, a void. It was my wife who finally broke, her intuition screaming what my pride was deaf to. "I'm going to check on him," she said, and she went up. I stayed downstairs, arms crossed, still, stewing in my own rightness. Then I heard it. It wasn't a scream. It was a sound I'd never heard before, a raw, guttural cry of pure terror that came from my wife's throat. It was a sound that bypassed my brain and went straight to my spine, freezing me solid for a second before I took the stairs 2 at a time. His door was locked. She was pounding on it, screaming his name. "Kyle, Kyle, baby, please answer me." There was no sound from inside. Nothing. That was the worst part, the absolute nothing. I shouldered the door open, the wood around the lock splintering with a crack that sounded like a gunshot in the hallway. And then I saw it. The scene is burned into the back of my eyelids. The room was dim, and he was just there on the floor. He wasn't moving. There was blood, and an empty prescription bottle lying on its side near his hand. The world just fell away. The report card, my stupid, arrogant words, my righteous anger, it all just vaporized into this blinding, suffocating wave of pure horror. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands shaking so badly I could barely feel for a pulse. "Oh God, son, no, I was begging. I was apologizing to a boy who might not have been able to hear me. My wife was already on the phone, her voice a frantic, high-pitched threat as she screamed our address to the 911 operator. I cradled his head, and I remember the only thought my brain could form, a thought that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I did this. My words did this. I didn't push him to be better. I pushed him over the edge. I learned that night that a silence after a storm isn't peace. It's the moment the ground gives way beneath you. The ambulance ride is a blur of sirens and flashing lights. A chaotic dream I couldn't wake up from. But the emergency room, the ER, is where the dream became a cold, hard, unforgiving reality. The lights in there are so bright, they bleach out all the color. They leave no room for shadows or for the lies you tell yourself. They wheeled him away through those double doors, and my wife and I were left in a tiny, beige room with plastic chairs. We didn't speak. What was there to say? The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights, and the echo of my own words in my head. "You're embarrassing this family." I remember just staring at a smudge on the floor. A scuff mark from a gurney wheel, probably. I traced it with my eyes, over and over, because it was easier than looking at my wife's face, easier than facing the chasm I had blown open between us. Every time a doctor or a nurse walked past the door, our heads would snap up, our hearts in our throats. The waiting was its own kind of torture, a slow, meticulous unraveling of every certainty I'd ever held. Finally, a doctor came in. She looked young, but her eyes were old, tired. She had that calm, direct demeanor that comes from seeing too much. She told us he was stable. The word stable felt like the first full breath I'd taken in an hour. But then she started asking questions, not about the report card, not about his attitude. She asked about his sleep patterns, his appetite. Had he been withdrawing from friends? Did he seem hopeless? She was speaking a language I didn't understand, pointing to a landscape of pain I had been too blind to see. And then she said it. She looked right at me, her gaze not accusatory but factual, like she was stating the weather. "Your son," she said, "has a severe depressive illness. This wasn't a choice. It was a symptom." The word illness hit me like a physical blow. It sucked all the air out of the room. An illness like pneumonia or a broken bone. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't weak. He was sick, and I I had been blaming him for having a fever. I had been yelling at him for coughing. While he was fighting for his life against a disease I refused to see, I was the one handing the enemy more ammunition. My blame, my lectures, my tough love, it was all just noise drowning out his cry for help. In that bright, silent room with the smell of antiseptic in the air, the perfect, righteous father I thought I was just crumbled into dust. There are no words for the shame of realizing you've been the villain in your own child's story. In the days and weeks that followed, we had to learn a new language. We had to stop speaking the language of blame and start learning the language of responsibility. And let me tell you, they are not the same thing. Not even close. Blame is about finding a culprit. It's a backward-looking thing, a search for who's at fault. It's what I did that night with the report card. I needed someone to be wrong, and I made sure it was him. Responsibility. Responsibility is different. It's forward-looking. It's not about who caused the crisis, it's about who is going to show up to help fix it. It's about owning your part in the healing, even when that part is admitting you were the one who made the wounds deeper. For me, that started with the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I had to sit across from my son, in a room that wasn't our home, and I had to listen. Not to defend myself, not to explain, not to interrupt. Just to listen. And I heard about the crushing weight he felt every single day. I heard about the noise in his head that my yelling just made louder. I heard how my words, the ones I thought were building him up, felt like little cuts, over and over, until he was just bleeding out emotionally. And when he was done, I didn't say I was just trying to help. I looked him in the eye, and with a heart that felt like it was breaking all over again, I said, I was wrong. I am so sorry. I failed you. That was the turning point. Not the apology itself, but the shift it represented. It meant I was finally taking responsibility for my ignorance, for my stubbornness, for my refusal to see his pain for what it was. My wife, she had her own journey of responsibility to be the steady rock, to learn about this illness, to advocate for him in a medical system that can be so confusing. We became a team, not a tribunal. We stopped asking, whose fault is this? And started asking, what does he need to get through today? Some days it was just silence, other days it was a walk. It was learning that support isn't about having the right answer. It's about having the presence to sit with someone in their question. It's a humbling thing to have to be taught how to love your own family properly. But that's what we had to do. We had to tear down the house I built on a foundation of blame and judgment and stop rebuilding, brick by painful brick, on a foundation of compassion and responsibility. We learned that blame points a finger, but responsibility offers a hand. So, where are we now? A year on from that night. It's the question everyone wants to ask, but is afraid to. The truth is, we're not fixed. We're not a perfect family portrait again, and I hope we never pretend to be. We are a family in repair. The cracks are still visible, if you know where to look, and I think we want them to be. They remind us of the cost of not seeing, of not listening. Our son, he's home, he's fighting. Some days are good, genuinely good. We'll hear him laugh from the other room, and it's a sound more beautiful to me now than any symphony. And some days are hard. There's a heaviness that can descend without warning, a quiet that still makes my wife and me exchange a look across the dinner table. The edge he went over that night, it's still there. It's a real place in the geography of our lives now. We don't pretend it isn't. We just all work very, very hard to make sure none of us ever gets that close to it again. Our new reality is fragile. It's learning to celebrate the small victories, a finished homework assignment, a meal eaten together, a conversation that doesn't end in a slamming door. It's understanding that healing isn't a straight line going up. It's a winding path with setbacks and surprises. We have a new vocabulary in our house now: therapy, medication, triggers, coping mechanisms. Words that used to feel clinical and scary but now just feel responsible. They are the tools we use to keep our foundation solid. I stand here tonight not as a man who has all the answers, but as a man who learned the hardest lesson of his life too late, but just in time. I look out at all of you, and I see parents, partners, friends. I see people who are probably just as busy, just as stressed, just as convinced of their own rightness as I was. And so if you take one thing from our family story, from my failure, let it be this simple, urgent plea: please, look past the anger you see in someone's eyes. Listen past the silence. See the struggle behind the slamming door, because the words you choose in a moment of frustration can be a lifeline, or they can be the final, devastating weight. A moment of blame can truly change a life forever, and you never want to learn that lesson the way I did, kneeling on a floor, praying for a second chance you're not sure you'll get. Look past the anger and see the struggle.